Hello, fiber friends. Have you ever heard of a rag and bone man? And I'm not talking about the musician. The rag and bone man was someone who would go around with a sack and a cart, and they would gather up and collect rags and bones and metal and other things that could be used to be recycled. Metal, obviously, could be melted down and reformed into useful things. Bone could be used to make glue, handles for tools, fertilizers, and other various useful objects. And rags could be shredded up and used for making paper. And rags could also be shredded up, carded, and used to make cloth. So today we're going to talk about shoddy. This is a shoddy video. In the past, people had to find ways to reuse their stuff. Of course, they had less single-use stuff, but they had to find ways to reuse things because depending on your social status, resources could have been very scarce. And things were considered valuable until they lost their usefulness. And so they would be used and used and repurposed and used at the very end of their life where they could go back into the system in a way that a specific craftsperson could remanufacture something using that item. Eventually, what was invented to handle fabric recycling was something called a garnetting machine. It basically takes cloth and shreds it and fluffs it up. Then you can take that and put it through a carding machine, and it can be processed and spun as woolen yarn. There's yarn that you can get at this very moment at your local yarn store. This is from Barocco. That is technically, it's garnetted yarn. It's recycled. So this is called Remix. I paid $13.75 for it. It is 100% recycled fibers. And here's the breakdown. 30% nylon, 27% cotton, 24% acrylic, 10% silk, and 9% linen. It has a beautiful kind of tweed look to it. Of course I got it because it's purple, but it has a lot of dimension of color in there. And that's from all of the shredded up, respun fibers that are in there. I want to see if I can respin some of my own waste fibers, things that have been left over from other projects that I want to turn into new yarn. I'm going to take a look at a couple different fiber types. I'm going to look at wool, cotton, silk, and linen / rayon. I'm going to start with the wool because I have the most experience with it and I know it's going to be the easiest. This was fisherman's wool and I used it for a color and weave sampler project that I did. It was cut off the loom. This is just the leftover extra stuff from that project. I was considering whether or not I should cut these because it's already in a nice bundle, so it's easy to hold. I think what I will try is just to run my drum card, the big open teeth one, and just let it snag things off the end and see if it will shred it up that way on its own. And then I'll take it to the other drum card that has closer together teeth. This one is 72 and my other one has 90. So I think this will be better for shredding it open and that one will be better for prepping to spin. So let's see how this goes. The wool was not fun. This feels terrible, and I kind of hate it. I don't mind the fisherman's wool. This is fine. This feels like it should be insulation. It's terrible. I just feel like I have so much nicer wool to work with that This is very unpleasant to feel. I don't like this one. So I'll spin this one first and get it out of the way. I have to take a moment to tell you a funny misunderstanding that I had. Virgin wool is a label that you'll see sometimes on woolen goods. And I thought it was like the first shearing of the sheep, and so therefore it would be softer and finer and all that. That's not true. Virgin wool is an indicator that it's the first time that wool has gone through the manufacturing and textile process, which means you could have a 50-year-old sheep. I don't know how you'd get a 50-year-old sheep, but you could have a 50-year-old sheep. It could be the wiriest, coarsest wool imaginable, and you could shear that sheep and put that wool through the textile manufacturing system and spit out a sweater eventually at the other end. And that sweater can be labeled as virgin wool because it's the first time that that particular wool has gone through the system. Then you can take that sweater, shred it up, and respin it, and then you've got garnetted wool. Shoddy cloth was something designating that it was not virgin wool. It had been through the system and it was being recycled. It was on its, maybe second time through. I have some cotton. This is mallow from Just Yarn. I used this in a project, obviously. This is what was cut off of the loom when I took my piece of cloth that I wove off of the loom. These are called thrums, and it's the bundled up waste yarn. There's always going to be waste on a loom because you can't weave all the way up to the knot. There's no room to over and unders, and you can't slide anything back and forth on there. So there's always going to be some amount of loom waste. It's just part of the process. So I have some of this that I'm going to take apart. Let's see what we can do with this cotton. Now, this is actually going to be a little bit easier because like I said, I have examined the structure of this yarn. I mean, I knew what the structure of the Fisherman's was. It's just a woolen 2-ply. Cotton can be varied. So I wanted to know how they did this because it is a slubby cotton, which means it has lots of little bumps and there's some thick spots. I was nervous to try this as warp. I was telling one of my patrons about this, who's doing some cotton spinning and weaving. I was nervous to use this as warp because, you always think you can't use bumpy, slubby, textured things as warp because the texture will get caught on the reed or in the heddles and it'll tear up the yarn and then it'll fall apart, but this was fine. It's totally fine. Okay, got my knot taken apart. Now, cotton is a much finer fiber and it's a much shorter fiber than wool. To get the slubby look, what they did was ply it with a thread. So if I untwist it, I can kind of pull that thread off of there. And that is what I would refer to as a binder thread because it's really binding the yarn into its structure. Once that's out of there, the rest of it just falls apart very easily. I do have some cotton cards. Their TPI is 208. So if you're not carding something very fine with it, it's just gonna float across the top of the teeth. You can't get it down in there at all. But before we're ready for that, we need to have it fluffed up. So I think for this one, I'm gonna go through and hand pick it first to get the thread off of there. And then I'll come back with there's the rest of that thread. I'll come back with the cotton cards to get it into some kind of a spinnable form, probably relax. And then I'll probably use spindle to spin it. Get that first thread off of there. That feels like a lot of work for this tiny little pile of fluff. Sometimes, you know, it just takes a while to work through a fleece too, so it's not that different. It's just like a different format. I had more fun pulling apart the cotton than I thought I would. I was pleasantly surprised. I could see myself taking a pile of this and shredding it up. But I think part of that was due to the specific construction of that yarn, because it had the binder on it. I think it was actually core spun, just because of the way that the fluff would slide off of the other two strands, and when I untwisted it, there was just one of the thinner strands going around the outer. So I think basically I think the two threads are there, and then the cotton fluff is spun around it, and then it's just like covered with loose fluff, right? So then that other binder is put around it, and that also helps to give it that slubby look. Because of that, it was easy to pull the fluff off of the center threads. I don't think every cotton yarn would be that fun to pull apart. But if I do more, I don't know, dishcloths or something with that yarn, I might specifically get that yarn so that I could pull apart the thrums if I wanted to play with the cotton later and do something else with it. It feels worth it to me to take it apart, although I haven't spun it yet, but the take apart part was fun. I also wanted to show you all that there's probably a very easy source of garnetted reclaimed fibers that many spinners who prep and process our own fibers are already familiar with. This is recycled sari silk. This is the same as this in terms of source. These are from the thrums that are cut off the looms when fabric for saris is being woven. And then these go through a garnet machine, and depending on how processed it is, it's going to be more or less fluffy. Sometimes when you look really close, you can actually see the pieces of threads and kind of chewed up material in there. And that is just textile waste that has been processed to be reclaimed and used in a new Textile. This is already shredded for me, so that makes things easier. I am going to blend it up a little bit though, because I think these colors are so beautiful, and I think it would look neat if they were just a little bit kind of blurred together. So I'm gonna do that on my big drum card, but there's not enough to fill the drum card, so I'm just gonna do it on kind of the edge. I'm gonna pretend that the drum card is not as wide, and I'm just gonna put it all on one side, and then that'll work. You might be watching this and saying, but Evie, it's already in roving form. Why would you run it through the drum carder? And I will tell you that this is why. Because it opens everything up and it fluffs it up and it makes it so much easier to spin from. And look how beautiful that is all blended up. I can't wait, this is my favorite. But like this is like officially garnetted. Shredded up. And so I have a lot here to play with, and I will say that the color also may have something to do with it. I'm dropping it everywhere. This is from several projects. These are the scraps, the cabbage, if you will, from a few sewing projects that I did. If it's a large enough piece that I can use it for another project or as a patch on a different repair or something, I might save it for that. But a lot of these pieces are long and narrow, and with linen, these are mostly linen. I think this also has some rayon in it, but linen just loves to fall apart. If you look at it funny, it's gonna start to fray. So I think that because these are, look, I'm just tugging on it and all of this is coming apart. I think because these are linen, they might be very easy to pull the threads apart. The thing I can't quite figure out is how I, as you know, with the tools and equipment that I have, how I would get those threads into a fluffy form. If you run material through a garnet machine, which is what the shredding machine that fluffs it all up is called, it's similar to a card, like a carding machine, like this is a card. But a garnet machine nyams more than a card does. So it actually shreds and fluffs up, and then you could take it to the card and have it processed into bats that would then be spun. So it does have like teeth and stuff. It looks very similar, but it is technically, it's a different machine. I also have some of this linen, beautiful, beautiful linen, but like it's printed and then there's chunks of white. So anyway, I'm gonna see if I can pull those threads apart, but then I'm not sure how I could fluff them. So they might just be added to something else as the base. That's fine. I'm happy to do that. I was playing around with the fabric a little bit, and so far I got this pile of threads. If you can untwist it enough, you can get these little fibers out of there, but this just feels so short for spinning. So I think I will leave them as threads and put them into something else, because as I was able to pull apart that cotton yarn, I can do that because there's a length of it. Like I have enough to hold on to untwist and pull it apart. This though, the little threads coming off the ends are just so very short. I can't really get a good grip on it. Of course, there's the longer threads from the, I don't know which way I cut this. It's either warp or weft. There's the longer threads that are running the length of this strip, but
whatever's running the width of the strip is pretty easy to pick right off of there. And now I have these little bits of thread. But this is what I was thinking. This is too fine to spin all on its own. This is gonna have to go into something. It'll make it sort of in effect like a tweed, kind of. If I did something contrasting, that could definitely be a lot of fun.
I think if I'm going to be working with fabric scraps, I have a better way to use those rag rugs. I warped this one and Mark wove it, and this is just strips of some random fabric that we tore into strips. It's not finished though. Mark, I guess, is never gonna finish it, so I'm just gonna have to go ahead and finish it. It's bugging me because, you know, it's here, it could be useful. Let's make it useful.
So I'm not calling this a failure. It's just the nature of the material and what it can and can't do. I don't think there's really a way to get that any fluffier with the tools that I have. But, you know, it's worth playing around with. I might be missing something. If anyone has an idea, shout it at me. Let me know what you're thinking.
I know a lot of spinners have tried to spin dryer lint. You will discover that there are some things that are just too short. They don't have enough length to exist within a twist. That twist is glue. And if the fiber isn't long enough to be twisted, it's going to shed, it's gonna fall out. Even if you blend it with something else, it's gonna come out of there. So there's a limit to the number of times you can shred things down.
There is a now famous quote from the author Terry Pratchett in one of his Discworld books, and it explains why it's expensive to be poor. And it goes like this. At the time of men-at-arms, Samuel Vimes earned $38 a month as a captain of the watch, plus allowances. A really good pair of leather boots, the sort that would last years and years, cost $50. This was beyond his pocket, and the most he could hope for was an affordable pair of boots costing $10, which might, with luck, last a year or so before he would need to resort to makeshift cardboard insoles, so as to prolong the moment of shelling out another $10. Therefore, over a period of 10 years, he might have paid out $100 on boots, twice as much as the man who could afford $50 up front 10 years before, and he would still have wet feet. Shoddy fabric was meant to be cheap, affordable fabric. It was meant for the lower classes, the people with less money to spend on their clothes. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't fashionable, it was cheap, and it did the job, but it would wear out quickly.
You're gonna see some holes start to form, it's gonna pill, it's not gonna hold up as well as something with longer virgin fibers. They are wearing working clothing and they are working in their clothing. So they're gonna say, oh my gosh, that's full of holes, that's shoddy. See where that came from? So now, when we say shoddy, we're not even referring to the fabric, we're referring to something that seems to not last or not hold up and fall apart easier. Now, if we move into like a more current, modern consideration of recycling, my friend Christine Vike has a YouTube channel and she did a video about this a couple years ago, so I'm gonna link it because she has a lot of statistics and details and things.
I think it's good that we have more and more recycling happening in our textile system, that I'm seeing more and more recycled goods, but I'm not sure that recycling fibers that are blends of like wool with acrylic is doing much good.
Our modern garments are not meant for recycling. When you've blended things up, there's a certain point where you're just gonna be shedding microplastics and the garment's gonna fall apart.
There are places that those types of fibers can be recycled and used, like insulation, moving blankets. So please don't get me wrong. I do think that recycling is a good thing. It can be a solution for some things that could otherwise end up in a landfill, but it is not going to save us from overconsumption. We need more solutions. This was an interesting experiment, and I appreciate these observations. I will be continuing to shred up and recycle some of my own cotton from my cotton projects, and I might use some of my wool leftovers as stuffing for, I don't know, maybe the dog bed, because that was so unpleasant. The recycled silk is always going to have my heart. I love working with that and blending it into things. And I think it might be time that I make a few more rag rugs with my leftover fabric scraps. Maybe we'll take a look at that in a future video.